Greetings and salutations, folks, and welcome once again, as always, to another helping of Mr. H's Hot Pot. You join me today for something a little different. Today, I'm currently on a bimble in my hometown of Wigan. I'm currently making my way through the public footpaths and the fields of Appley Bridge, where I'm making my way to a house with a very strange name and a very strange story behind it. Now, if you're from Wigan, you've probably heard of the legend of Skull House in Appley Bridge. If you haven't, the story goes that during the English Civil War in the 1600s, that a monk was seeking refuge and hiding from Roundhead soldiers, which were Cromwell's men, Oliver Cromwell. He was hiding from them in a cubbyhole in the chimney of what later became known as Skull House. Unfortunately for him, the Roundhead soldiers got wind of where he was hiding, and they arrived one day, lit a fire in the fireplace below, and basically forced him out with heat and smoke. The monk obviously couldn't hold out. He came outside, he was arrested, and he was then executed, and his head was cut off. Now, the legend goes that ever since then, his skull has remained in the house, and if anyone tries removing it, ill will basically find them, bad luck and all that kind of stuff. And the skull will always mysteriously reappear back on the mantelpiece in Skull House. Now, the number of former residents have supposedly tried removing the skull from the house down the ages, and indeed ill will has found them. Two classic examples of this is, first of all, there was a gentleman who took the skull and he threw it in the River Douglas. He took it down the road from Skull House, went to the bridge there and threw it as far down the river as he could, thinking he was rid of it. Unfortunately for him, by the time he returned home, it was back on the mantelpiece, and later on it's reported that he drowned in the River Douglas. Rather spooky stuff, eh? Another example is someone who removed it and they tried to get it as far away from the house as possible. They didn't want to be disrespectful by throwing it in the river. They probably had heard of that story. So they decided what they would do, they would just take it away from the house as far as they could and leave it somewhere so as not to be disrespectful. Unfortunately for them, the skull made its way back to the house, and they later fell down the stairs, injuring themselves rather severely. Now, there is one good story about Skull House and the skull. Is someone did indeed outfox the skull, and what they did was, rather than remove it from the house, they had a little cupboard built into the fireplace or above the mantelpiece, and they put the skull in there. And it seems whoever or whatever is attached to that particular skull was happy with the arrangement. No ill will befell that particular person, and that's the state of play today. The skull is indeed still in that house because the current residents won't dare remove it. Anyway, I'm going to make my way to Skull House now. That was a bit of history about the house, and we'll take a look at it. Now, obviously, with such a legend being attached to the house, the current residents are probably fed up to the back teeth, if you pardon the pun, of paranormal tourists. So we're just going to take a quick look at it, and then we'll leave, and we'll talk a bit about the legend, whether it's true or not. So come on, folks, let's make our way to Skull House in Appley Bridge. And here we go, Hot Potters. This is Skull House Cottage in Appley Bridge, where reputedly a human skull sits above the fireplace. And there are the chimneys that supposedly a monk hid in way back during the Civil War. Now, as I said, I don't want to encroach on these people's privacy too much, as I'm sure they're fed up of paranormal tourists like myself coming and pointing cameras at the property. So I'm going to whip the camera around and we'll continue talking about this strange story. So, Hot Potters, is the legend true or is it not? Well, let's look at some basic facts. First of all, there is indeed a human skull, or there has been, in that property. We know that because there are plenty of witnesses from modern day who say they've seen it, they've held it, they've seen it when there was a kid and things like that. And we also know that the story is part true, because after all, there's a road in Appley Bridge named after it, although Skull House isn't actually on the lane that's named after it. And the bridge that allegedly the skull was thrown from, that also exists. And as you can see, the River Douglas at this point runs rather fast, so I can understand the idea of the gentleman who decided to throw it from the bridge into the River Douglas below, with the idea of probably carrying it as far as he could downstream. This point here is about 10 minutes walk, half a mile away from Skull House. So those parts of the story are true at least. But what about the rest? Well, let's start with the Civil War connection. Whilst it is true that the English Civil War did touch this part of the world, the Civil War happened in the 1600s, long after the monasteries had been dissolved under Henry VIII's reign, which was in the 1500s. So it would not have been Roundhead soldiers that would have persecuted and executed this poor monk. Now, interestingly, Oliver Cromwell shares his surname with a gentleman named Thomas Cromwell, who oversaw the dissolution of the monasteries in England on behalf of Henry VIII. Now, as far as I know, he is of no relation to Oliver Cromwell, but that could be where the confusion comes in a little bit, maybe. It's just that people have got the wrong timeline. However, for us to believe that version of the story, we have to believe that that house that we took a look at earlier was built, or certainly around, during the reign of Henry VIII, which, as I said, was in the 1500s. There is no evidence to suggest that, and the house, to be honest, doesn't look from that period. It doesn't appear to be Tudor, so I don't think that bit is correct, to be honest. And the most damning evidence is that an examination of the skull showed that it was actually the skull of a female, not a male. So, to be honest, the monk's story debunked. But what about the gentleman who allegedly removed the skull from Skull House Cottage and threw it in the River Douglas? Is that bit true? Well, without a name, it's going to be very difficult to prove that's the case. And to be honest, I did a lot of research for this video, and I couldn't find any residents who'd lived at Skull House Cottage in Appley Bridge who have died from drowning, let alone in the River Douglas. So as I say, that's a little bit iffy, as is the story of the person who allegedly fell downstairs after removing the skull. To be honest, I've fallen downstairs a couple of times in my life. Nothing paranormal involved in that. Just got wrong-footed, basically. What about the story of the person who outfoxed the skull? Well, that's partially true. There is a cupboard above the mantelpiece in that house where the skull normally resides. My guess is, though, that rather than try and outfox the skull, the person who had that built simply was a little bit superstitious, but they didn't like the thoughts of a skull looking back at them on those long winter evenings. So they decided not to tempt fate and have it placed in a box, therefore appeasing the skull on the superstitious side, but not having to look at it. Well, Hot Potters, that'll just about do it for today. I hope you've enjoyed today's little video, taking a look at the legend of Skull House in Appley Bridge in my hometown of Wigan. I've certainly enjoyed making this video. Something a little bit different. I don't normally cover paranormal stuff on my channel, but I found the story so interesting, and I have always wanted to locate Skull House and take a look at it, and today was the day. Now, where do you sit on this story, Hot Potters? If you went and purchased a property and you found out that it had a resident skull sitting in a box above the mantelpiece, would you heed the warning if you was told not to remove it, otherwise bad things would happen to you? Or would you throw caution to the wind and get rid of it, not wanting it in your home? Please leave your comments below on that one. Right then, I'm now going to head off back to the old jalopy and head off home to edit up all this footage ready for your edification. So, until the next time folks, when I'm out and about once again, it is bye-bye for now.